I'd like to call the Board of Legislators meeting to order for May 24th and ask if Legislator Mike Healy would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of all my fellow veterans, and especially as we approach this Memorial Day holiday, in memory of those who made the supreme sacrifice, I ask you to join me in saying the pledge to our nation's flag that we all served. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
And if Legislator Judy Hopkins would give the invocation for today.
Let us pray together. Holy Father, please be with us today and bring us closer to you. Be with our families, friends, colleagues. Be with those who are hurting and sick. Bring them healing wherever possible and comfort and strength to all. Be with those who protect us, both at home and far away. Please bless the souls of those who have served our country and given their all for us. We ask for your guidance in all that we do here today. Please grant us wisdom, understanding, knowledge, and peace. We ask this in Jesus' holy name. Amen.
Thank you, Legislator Healy, for the Pledge of Allegiance, and Legislator Hopkins for the invocation today. Roll call.
Mr. Barnes.
Present.
Mrs. Burdick. Here. Mr. Crandall.
Here.
Mr. Curran.
Here.
Mr. Decker.
Here.
Mr. Dibble. Mr. Fanton. Mr. Graves.
Here.
Mr. Harris.
Here.
Mr. Havey.
Here.
Mr. Healy.
Here.
Mrs. Hopkins.
Here.
Mr. Ricky.
Here.
Mrs. Root. Here. Mr. Stockin.
Here.
14 legislators present, 1 absent. You were provided a copy of the Committee of the Whole meeting minutes of May 5th. At this time, we need a motion to approve those minutes.
Motion is made by Legislator Fanton, seconded by Legislator Havey. Discussion. All in favor of their approval, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried and minutes approved.
You were provided a copy of the May 10th Committee of the Whole meeting minutes, and we need a motion to approve those minutes.
Motion is made by Legislator Burdick, seconded by Legislator Graves. Discussion. All in favor of their adoption, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried, and those minutes are approved.
You were also provided a copy of the board meeting minutes of May 10th, and we need a motion to approve those minutes.
Motion is made by Legislator Harris, seconded by Legislator Curran. Discussion. All in favor of their approval, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's carried, and those minutes are approved. You'll see on our agenda that we have celebrating Poppy Day today, and myself and the other legislators, our administrative team, and those in the chambers, many of us wearing these paper poppies. And I would like to have, for a number of years, the auxiliary from the Herbert DeLong Post 808 here in Belmont has come up, supplied these poppies, and we make a donation for those, but it continues a long-standing tradition honoring our veterans. And I'd like to have our Director of Veteran Services, Mike Hennessy, come up and join me for a couple of minutes if he would. Actually, the ladies from the American Legion, the auxiliary, were going to be here, and couldn't make it, but more appropriately, or certainly is Mike Hennessy, our Director of Veterans Services, and I want to give Mike a chance to say a few words. He didn't know he was going to be speaking today until 5 minutes ago, but he can handle that. You'll see that a couple of things. We're going to have a proclamation that deals with the poppies, and a number of us got a little bit of a brochure here that came along with that. And I like the bottom of the first section there where it says, honor the dead and aid the living, wear a paper poppy every Memorial Day. We remember these as kids, and when we go to the parades and see auxiliary or Legion members walking up and down before the parade began, selling these poppies. They're produced and made by disabled veterans, and the donation for those goes to help support that program. So it's for a worthy cause. But I think more importantly is the symbolism of remembering our veterans, and we sometimes get confused with Veterans Day or Armed Forces Day with Memorial Day, and I think for a lot, Memorial Day is lost on the idea that it's the first day of summer, hot dogs, parades, and a good time. But we don't want to lose sight of the fact that it's really for those that gave the ultimate sacrifice for us. And in many of our meetings, we've talked about the rights and privilege that we have to go through the election process and be able to sit here in these chambers and serve as county legislators, but that didn't come without great sacrifice and the ultimate sacrifice by many that fought for those freedoms. At the bottom of this sheet, it also says the measure of a man may be his willingness to serve his country. The measure of a country may be its willingness to honor those who have served. I think that at this time I'll have our Director of Veterans Services, Mike Hennessy, share a few words, and I do have a proclamation on Poppy Day. So, Mike, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And on behalf of the veterans of Allegheny County, I would like to express our appreciation on this proclamation. One thing I would like to just remind everybody that it doesn't matter if you're a wartime veteran or a peacetime veteran. Every era was important to secure our freedom and our way of life. So on Memorial Day, when you're with your friends and family, just take a second and remember that sacrifice your family member or your friends have done. It'll be greatly appreciated. And once again, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for being here with us today. The proclamation for Poppy Day is, whereas the American Legion family brought National Poppy Day to the United States by asking Congress to designate the Friday before Memorial Day as National Poppy Day. And whereas the custom can be traced back to 1918, when Moyna Michael popularized the idea of wearing a poppy flower in memory of the lives lost in World War I, which was inspired from the poem In Flanders Fields, written by Colonel John McCrae in his sorrow at looking at the rows and rows of graves where his comrades recently had been buried. And whereas National Poppy Day is a strong renewal of our nation's commitment to a powerful reminder of the cost of our freedom with 100 years of rich tradition, and whereas millions of people worldwide wear, display, and distribute the poppy as a call to honor living veterans and those who have lost their lives, and whereas the Allegheny County Board of Legislators wishes to honor the sacrifices that people in the military make to protect our country. Now therefore, I, Curtis W. Crandall, Chairman of the Allegheny County Board of Legislators, do hereby proclaim Friday, May 28th, 2021 to be Poppy Day in Allegheny County.
On your desk is a copy of the June calendar. Are there going to be any changes? Please note that Committee of the Whole meetings were added on the first and third Wednesday at 10 a.m. Also on your desk is a copy of the 2021 supplement to our Allegheny County directory. I believe this is available online, and if you need additional copies, they are available in my office. We received a declaration of state of emergency from the Village of Wellsville. It was issued April 30th for the period April 30th through May 29th. We received correspondence from the Allegheny County Industrial Development Agency regarding a proposed deviation from uniform tax exemption policy in connection with its proposed Omni-Cuba solar project. We received a notice of the next Fire Advisory Board meeting. It's going to be on Thursday, May 27th at 7 p.m. at Crossroads. Chairman Crandall declared May 28th as Poppy Day in Allegheny County, and he's read that proclamation.
Thank you. Resolutions.
Resolution intro number 10521. 2021 budget adjustment for funding of 3 positions within the District Attorney's Office. This resolution was being offered by the Ways and Means Committee and has committee approval. This resolution was tabled at our April 12th committee meeting, and I believe we will need a motion to bring it off the table.
Motion to bring it off the table made by Legislator Healy, seconded by Legislator Stockin. All in favor of that, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And I believe that motion has been made and seconded that when we originally did this, so this legislation is on the floor for discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Harris?
just because my head's spinning a little bit, I'd like to ask the county administrator if she's in favor of this resolution as presented.
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
Any further questions, clarification? This, in light of the other actions being taken, funds what's necessary for the district attorney's office. Roll call?
Mrs. Hopkins,
Yes.
Mr. Ricky,
Yes.
Mrs. Root,
Yes.
Mr. Stockin,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes, Mrs. Burdick,
Yes.
Mr. Crandall,
Yes.
Mr. Curran,
Yes.
Mr. Decker,
Yes.
Mr. Fanton,
Yes.
Mr. Graves, Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Havey,
Yes.
Mr. Healy.
Yes.
14 ayes, 1 absent.
Resolution is passed.
Resolution intro number 13321, adoption of the Allegheny County Local Solid Waste Management Plan. This resolution is being offered by the Public Works Committee and has committee approval.
Motion is made by Legislator Fanton, seconded by Legislator Ricky. Discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Hopkins,
Yes.
Mr. Ricky,
Yes.
Mrs. Rue,
Yes.
Mr. Stockin,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes, Mrs. Burdick,
Yes.
Mr. Crandall,
Yes.
Mr. Curran,
Yes.
Mr. Decker,
Yes.
Mr. Fanton,
Yes.
Mr. Graves, Mr. Harris, Mr. Havey,
Yes.
Mr. Healy.
Yes.
14 ayes, 1 absent.
Resolution is passed.
Resolution intro number 13421, appointment of one member to the Citizens Advisory Council to the Office for the Aging. This resolution is being offered by the Human Services Committee and has committee approval.
Moved by legislator Hopkins, seconded by legislator Burdick. Discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Yes. Legislator Hopkins?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to offer an amendment to this resolution to change one word in the resolution, that the appointment of Lois Whitney of Bolivar rather than Belmont, New York, is the correct wording.
All right, we're changing the, from Belmont to Bolivar. There's a motion made to amend that. Is there a second for that? Second made by legislator Burdick. All in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Any further discussion on the amended resolution? If not, we can voice vote this resolution. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Resolution is passed.
Resolution intro number 13521, approval of grant application for the Homeland Security Grant Program by the Office of Emergency Management and Fire Service. This resolution is being offered by the Public Safety and Ways and Means Committees and has both committees' approval.
Moved by legislator Healy, seconded by legislator Fanton. Discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. Ricky?
Yes.
Mrs. Root?
Yes.
Mr. Stockin?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes? Mrs. Burdick?
Yes.
Mr. Crandall?
Yes.
Mr. Curran?
Yes.
Mr. Decker?
Yes.
Mr. Fanton?
Yes.
Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Havey?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
14 ayes, 1 absent.
Resolution is passed.
Resolution intro number 13621, approval of grant application for Homeland Security and Emergency Services LEMPG fiscal year 2021 grant by the Office of Emergency Management and Fire Services. This resolution is being offered by the Public Safety and Ways and Means Committees and has both committees' approval.
Motion is made by legislator Healy, seconded by legislator Fanton. Discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. Ricky?
Yes.
Mrs. Root?
Yes.
Mr. Stockin?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Burdick?
Yes.
Mr. Crandall?
Yes.
Mr. Curran?
Yes.
Mr. Decker?
Yes.
Mr. Fanton?
Yes.
Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yeah.
Mr. Havey?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
14 ayes, 1 absent.
Resolution is passed.
Resolution intro number 13721, approval of agreements for transportation of preschool children with handicapping conditions with 16 central school districts. This resolution is being offered by the Human Services Committee and has committee approval.
Moved by Mrs. Hopkins, seconded by Mrs. Burdick. Discussion? Mr. Barnes?
I'm not opposed to this, I'd just like to, did somebody explain what's happening here? I'm not opposed to this necessarily, but I'm just interested in what this is all about as far, why are we involved? Why is the county involved as opposed to the school districts handling this themselves?
Well, I'll give you the short story.
That's what I'm looking for.
Counties for a long time have said we shouldn't be involved, that it's not a county operation, that it should be school, but that's not the way that it lands. And I can have someone expand on it further, but before I let it go, I do want to mention and bring up former legislator Lee Fryer. And I've made sure that his name is mentioned each time this comes up, as long as I've been here. And he was a legislator out of District 3 lived in Allegheny County, actually was a longtime Portville school superintendent. And we all come on this board with the idea that we could come up with an idea that would save a lot of taxpayer dollars. And Lee Fryer was the one that worked on this and put this together, and literally has saved Allegheny County taxpayers millions through this agreement with the schools versus approaching it any other way. So, our hats off to Lee Fryer, and in light of the what we talked about with Memorial Day and that, Lee was not only a veteran, but he was, I think, second wave on Omaha Beach in Normandy. But that's getting off track of your question. Short answer is we have to do it, and this was the least expensive way to make that happen. If someone can expand on it further, I certainly would appreciate it.
Well, I know Mr. Shaw is here. If you want to know how the program's utilized, I'm sure he could tell you.
Sure, just the short of it is.
Tyler, if you can, let's grab one of the, apologize for that, but if you could grab that mic back there, and then we'd be able to hear you better. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you. Tyler Shaw, Public Health Director. The short of it is we are required by New York State education law to either provide transportation for these children, either directly or by contract. This is the cheapest option that we have. We don't have a county bus transportation for children services, and the contracts that we've looked at could be anywhere in the ballpark of $18,000 per child. So this is kind of the compromise that we've come up with.
Thank you for the explanation.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks for the more professional explanation. I did get my Lee Fryer plug in, though. Legislator Healy?
Yes, thank you for the putting this into the historical context on the whole matter, and it is a great savings for the county, and I think everybody will be supporting this. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. Ricky?
Yes.
Mrs. Root?
Yes.
Mr. Stockton?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Burdick?
Yes.
Mr. Crandall?
Yes.
Mr. Curran?
Yes.
Mr. Decker?
Yes.
Mr. Fanton?
Yes.
Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Mr. Harris? Mr. Havey?
Yes.
Mr. Healy? 14 ayes, 1 absent.
Resolution is passed.
Resolution intro number 13821. Acceptance and appropriation of a donation for the Office for the Aging from the Allegheny Senior Foundation on behalf of the Western New York Foundation to support seniors remaining in their homes. This resolution is being offered by the Human Services and Ways and Means Committees and has both committees' approval.
Moved by Mrs. Hopkins, seconded by Mrs. Burdick. Discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. Ricky?
Yes.
Mrs. Root?
Yes.
Mr. Stockton?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Burdick?
Yes.
Mr. Crandall?
Yes.
Mr. Curran?
Yes.
Mr. Decker?
Yes.
Mr. Fanton?
Yes.
Mr. Graves? Mr. Harris? Mr. Havey?
Yes.
Mr. Healy? 14 ayes, 1 absent.
Resolution is passed. And before the clerk reads the next one, I'll put in a cheap, unsolicited plug for our senior foundation that was formed a number of years ago to be able to bring in monies other than tax monies directly from the taxpayers here in Allegheny County to help support our seniors. And I think this resolution is an example of that, where monies have been sought by that organization and brought in to help our senior population. So tip of the hat to our senior foundation. Thank you.
Resolution intro number 13921. Approval of agreement between Mark Waltag Esquire in the County of Allegheny for legal services for Allegheny County residents. This resolution is being offered by the Human Services Committee and has committee approval.
Moved by Mrs. Hopkins, seconded by Mrs. Burdick. Discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. Ricky?
Yes.
Mrs. Root?
Yes.
Mr. Stacken?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Burdick?
Yes.
Mr. Crandall?
Yes.
Mr. Curran?
Yes.
Mr. Decker?
Yes.
Mr. Fanton?
Yes.
Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Mr. Harris? Mr. Havey?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
14 ayes, 1 absent.
Resolution is passed.
Resolution intro number 14021. Approval of agreement with Trusted Choice Home Care for consumer-directed care for home care aids for the ISEP, ADCSI, Unmet Needs, and 3E grants. This resolution is being offered by the Human Services Committee and has committee approval.
Motion is made by Mrs. Hopkins and seconded by Mrs. Burdick. Discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. Ricky?
Yes.
Mrs. Root?
Yes.
Mr. Stacken?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Burdick?
Yes.
Mr. Crandall?
Yes.
Mr. Curran?
Yes.
Mr. Decker?
Yes.
Mr. Fanton?
Yes.
Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Mr. Harris? Mr. Havey?
Yes.
Mr. Healy? 14 ayes, 1 absent.
Resolution is passed.
Resolution intro number 14121. Approval of agreement between Elderwood at Hornell LLC and the County of Allegheny for skilled nursing respite. This resolution is being offered by the Human Services Committee and has committee approval.
Motion is made by Mrs. Hopkins and seconded by Mrs. Burdick. Discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. Ricky?
Yes.
Mrs. Root?
Yes.
Mr. Stacken?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Burdick?
Yes.
Mr. Crandall?
Yes.
Mr. Curran?
Yes.
Mr. Decker?
Yes.
Mr. Fanton?
Yes.
Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Havey?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
14 ayes, 1 absent.
Resolution is passed.
Resolution intro number 14221. Approval of agreements between the County of Allegheny and multiple agencies for foster care services for the Department of Social Services. This resolution is being offered by the Human Services Committee and has committee approval.
Motion is made by Mrs. Hopkins and seconded by Mrs. Burdick. Discussion? Mr. Barnes? Mr. Barnes,
I'm looking
Thank
at this
you.
resolution and it says number 142-10. Is that, should that be 21?
Why, yes, it should be.
I thought so.
where are we looking, Brenda?
In the upper left-hand corner of the actual resolution.
Mr. Barnes, you're making a motion to amend to that and correct to that 142-10 to 142-21.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Motion made by Legislator Barnes, seconded by Legislator Graves to correct that intro number. All in favor of that, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Discussion on the amended resolution. I think Mr. Barnes wins the eyeball the resolutions finding an error or mistake of the year award for that one. That was a good one. Roll call?
Mrs. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. Ricky?
Yes.
Mrs. Root?
Yes.
Mr. Stacken?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Burdick?
Yes.
Mr. Crandall?
Yes.
Mr. Curran?
Yes.
Mr. Decker?
Yes.
Mr. Fanton?
Yes.
Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Mr. Harris? Mr. Havey?
Yes.
Mr. Healy? 14 ayes, 1 absent.
Resolution is passed.
Resolution intro number 14321, approval of agreement with D.I. Jacobs Consulting Company to conduct a compensation study. This resolution is being offered by the Personnel Committee and has committee approval.
Motion is made by Legislator Havey, seconded by Legislator Harris. Discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Chairman,
I'm sorry, Mr. Graves?
I do have a comment about the resolution.
Yep.
For a variety of reasons, I can't support this resolution. First of all, I want to thank Carissa Knapp, our county administrator, for her patience with me, the questions that I asked. She was very helpful and not a reason for my no vote. She did everything she could do to kind of change my attitude around. In theory, fairness, ensuring positions and employees are managed in a consistent and competitive manner, and the other things in this study is supposed to achieve has merit. The employees that this resolution interacts with, as with all of our employees, are critical to the delivery of goods and services that Allegheny County delivers to its citizens. I want them to succeed. I want them to be treated fairly, consistently, and sincerely. I was once one of them, and I know how challenging public service can be. It's what initially made me support this resolution in committee. However, further independent study, a review of the Cayuga report, which I have marked, and other issues along the lines of that, a review of those county comparisons and other things I found in the report raised additional caution flags that I cannot and will not ignore. At the core of this is the fact that I do not like studies. It's no offense to the company or anybody else. It's just I've had bad experiences with them, and more than one of them, and my constitution will not permit me to be a party to authorizing another one of this kind. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, if
Mr.
I may
Harris?
direct a question to Mr. Graves, is that appropriate?
Sure.
Thank you.
Why not?
If there's something within the Cayuga report you think that would be in the best interest of the remainder of the board to consider prior to vote,
We should probably go into executive session to do that, because there's some personnel issues and some other, it's the way the data was compiled. Maybe the county attorney can shed more light onto it. If you want me to discuss it, I will, but those issues were brought up in committee, some of those topics.
there were no new information?
Well, here, let me hit you with one. Let's do this one, and then we'll.
Let's not have executive session discussion, but if
No.
you can share something
No,
that's
this is-
pertinent.
This is all public, it's right in the report, those kind of things. What I don't want to, is a situation where we're comparing apples and oranges. Apples and oranges to me is, it's round, but it tastes different. They're all different. In the report, the comparison, one of the steps in the report is a comparison by county. It's going to compare us with, the Cayuga report is compared to these right now, because we haven't done our Allegheny County report. But other counties included are Lewis, Madison, Orleans, Seneca, Jefferson, Ontario, Chemung, Schuyler, Steuben, and Wayne. Steuben is the only one that would have any contiguous impact, any similarities. I think Allegheny County is unique. There's a category for collecting information in there that I don't see it there. And that's probably where we'd have to go into executive session to discuss that. But did I leave an opening?
For the county administrator, how urgent is the timing of this?
Well, it takes about 3 months to have the study completed, and I was hoping we'd have it in time for budget discussions. In my understanding of the external comparisons is that is part of the process. However, the stress is always on our internal factors. As we all know, $1 in Allegheny County is not the same as $1 in Steuben County, but we do need to look at what other counties pay when we look at our own factors here as well.
And you've taken a look at the same Cayuga report, and it's to your satisfaction?
Yes, I provided it to Mr. Graves, and I kind of went over a little bit with him, and I believe I've given him all the information he needs to make his decision, and it sounds like he's
She
made his
has,
decision.
she has. Chris has been fine. It's not that, it's, in my guts, I do not like studies. Bad experiences with them. One of the issues is that studies can be used as an excuse to do certain things, like raise taxes, raise wages. I don't like any opening like that. It's not saying that anything like that is proposed. It's my own fears from being involved in other studies. I just don't like it.
Let's, if we can, we'll move on. Mr. Harris, did you have anything
No,
further?
no, just thank you to the Legislator Graves.
Yep. And Legislator Healy?
Just briefly, Mr. Chairman, thank you, Carl. None of us want to raise taxes or use anything for an excuse to do so. This is nothing but a tool to help us make the best decisions in these matters on behalf of both our employees and the taxpayers. And I think that's all it is. We're going to make the ultimate decisions. It's just we have to be an informed consumer. That's the way I'm looking at it. And I plan to support this. Thank you.
Yes. Legislator Havey?
I'll make this very short. Legislator Healy just read my mind. Thank you.
You weren't supposed to tell anybody.
Yeah, I have a tendency to agree with Carl along those lines. I think the initial cost is going to be our smallest investment in this whole process, so I'm going to be a no vote.
Very good.
Thank
Well,
you. Mr. Chairman, I have one
yes.
other.
Legislator Graves?
I had one other. Dwight just rang a bell there. In the resolution, it says that the fiscal impact is up to $30,000, but if you look at the itemization, it's about 28,000. So is it 28 or 30? How much are we authorizing to spend?
I'm
Thank you,
looking,
Dwight.
fiscal impact I'm looking at says 30,000 up to.
I believe that MOE had been amended, and maybe the amended version did not make it into the agenda packet, but we did talk about that in committee. I'd put down 30. When we added it all up in committee, we said it was 28, and I think, talked about that in Personnel Committee, and
So
I
the math
thought
is
we had
20
amended that.
28.
Yes, 28 is the actual number.
Further discussion? Motion on the floor, and we're ready for the question. Roll call?
Mrs. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. Ricky?
Yes.
Mrs. Root?
Yes.
Mr. Stocken?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes?
No.
Mrs. Burdick?
Yes.
Mr. Crandall?
Yes.
Mr. Curran?
Yes.
Mr. Decker?
No.
Mr. Fanton?
No.
Mr. Graves?
No.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Havey?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
Ten ayes, 4 noes, 1 absent.
Resolution is passed.
Resolution intro number 14421. Approval of application for Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, Planning Grant for the Allegheny County Department of Planning. This resolution is being offered by the Planning and Economic Development Committees, and I believe Ways and Means as well. It was not pre-filed, and it will require a 2/3 vote to consider from the floor.
Motion on the 2/3 made by Mrs. Root, seconded by Mr. Stocken. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. On the resolution itself, motion is made by Mrs. Root, seconded by Mr. Barnes. Discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. Ricky?
Yes.
Mrs. Root? Mr. Stocken?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Burdick?
Yes.
Mr. Crandall,
Yes.
Mr. Curran,
Yes.
Mr. Decker,
Yes.
Mr. Fanton,
Yes.
Mr. Graves,
Yes.
Mr. Harris, Mr. Havey,
Yes.
Mr. Healy.
Yes.
14 ayes, 1 absent.
Resolution is passed.
Resolution intro number 14521, abolishment of the current Assistant District Attorney positions and creation of 1 full-time position of Assistant District Attorney and 4 part-time Assistant District Attorneys, amending Section 4 of Resolution number 297 of 1975. This resolution is being offered by the Public Safety and Personnel Committees and has both committees' approval. It was not pre-filed and it will require a 2/3 vote to consider from the floor.
Motion on the 2/3 made by Mr. Ricky, seconded by Mr. Curran. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. On the resolution itself, motion is made by Mr. Healy, seconded by Mr. Ricky. Discussion? Legislator Healy?
Comment, more of a comment. I just want to thank Ian Jones and the District Attorney's Office for their cooperation in this matter. And I think this will, these changes will serve both their office and the county well in the time to come. Thank you.
Further discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. Ricky?
Yes.
Mrs. Root?
Yes.
Mr. Stockin?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Burdick?
Yes.
Mr. Crandall?
Yes.
Mr. Curran?
Yes.
Mr. Decker?
Yes.
Mr. Fanton?
Yes.
Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Mr. Harris? Mr. Havey?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
14 ayes, 1 absent.
Resolution is passed.
Resolution intro number 14621, approval of agreement between Village of Wellsville and the County of Allegheny for an early voting site at 23 North Main Street, Wellsville, New York. This resolution is being offered by the Personnel Committee and has committee approval. It was not pre-filed and it will require a 2/3 vote to consider from the floor.
Motion on the 2/3 made by Legislator Curran, seconded by Legislator Ricky. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Carried. Motion on the resolution itself made by Legislator Havey, seconded by Legislator Harris. Discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Legislator Harris?
Thank you. I'm going to vote in favor of this because the Board of Elections needs it to comply with state Board of Election laws, but it should be noted for the listening audience that this is a state mandate, and it's an unfunded one at that, and it's an unfunded mandate that disproportionately punishes rural counties as opposed to larger counties. Rural counties such as ours would otherwise only be required to open 1 early voting place due to population, which we did very well. The Board of Elections should be commended for their efforts in the last general election, where they handled over 3,000 early voting people at their primary offices and weren't required to staff another location. In an effort to make the rest of the legislature feel better, there's a county up to the north who originally only had 1 polling place, which resides about a 1/4 mile outside the boundaries of their largest municipality. So they have to open a second polling place less than 1 mile away from their original polling place. Thank you.
Welcome to New York. Legislator Barnes?
I'm going to oppose this mainly for the reasons that were just pointed out. It's a state mandate, and I'm just sick and tired of all these mandates, and I'm going to oppose it on that reason. There's plenty of days of early voting that anybody that needs to early vote could certainly drive to Belmont, to the county election office to do their early voting. It's just a waste of time and money as far as I'm concerned, and I'm going to oppose it.
Further discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. Ricky?
No.
Mrs. Root?
Yes.
Mr. Stockin?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes?
No.
Mrs. Burdick?
Yes.
Mr. Crandall?
Yes.
Mr. Curran?
Yes.
Mr. Decker?
No.
Mr. Fanton?
Yes.
Mr. Graves?
No.
Mr. Harris? Mr. Havey?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
10 ayes, 4 noes, 1 absent.
Resolution is passed. How would you like your audits?
Collectively and by totals, please.
Collectively and by totals, moved by Legislator Stockin, seconded by Legislator Decker. All in favor of that, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
General government support, 132,089.30. Education, 7,174. Public safety, 37,247.61. Health, 28,393.24. Bus transportation, 85,388.25. Economic assistance and opportunity, 504,556.45. Culture and recreation, 12,728.51. Home and community services, 16,064.83. Employee benefits, 6,263.38. Our general fund totaled $829,905.57. Payroll and taxes totaled $1,065,926.57. Our capital funds totaled $19,469.19. Our other funds totaled $187,518.99 for a grand total of $2,102,820.32.
Motion to pay the bills. Motion to pay the bills, made by Legislator Havey, seconded by Legislator Root. Discussion? Mr. Barnes?
I'm just going to repeat what I said last month. I think it would make sense to round off to the nearest dollar as opposed to carrying out to the penny on this particular report. The federal government rounds off to the nearest million in a lot of cases, and the state rounds off to the nearest thousand. I would think that it would make it simpler and easier to read and understand if we rounded off to the nearest dollar. Thank you.
We did talk to the treasurer about that briefly after the meeting, your suggestion. It hadn't gone any further, but again, we're accounted to the penny, I guess, at this point.
I wouldn't complain though, Mr. Barnes.
You found a real friend in our clerk of the board. Further discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. Ricky?
Yes.
Mrs. Root?
Yes.
Mr. Stockin?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Burdick?
Yes.
Mr. Crandall?
Yes.
Mr. Curran?
Yes.
Mr. Decker?
Yes.
Mr. Fanton?
Yes.
Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Mr. Harris? Mr. Havey?
Yes.
Mr. Healy? 14 ayes, 1 absent.
Resolution is passed. Is there anything else to come before this board before we adjourn? Legislator Healy?
On our very first resolution of the day, Mr. Harris commented that his head was spinning. So I just was wondering if it stopped spinning yet.
I'm feeling much better, thank you.
I'm glad. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, as it appears there's no further business to conduct, I move we adjourn.
I'll second that.
Motion to adjourn made by Legislator Graves, seconded by Legislator Decker. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? we stand adjourned.